we're continuing with the history of research part 2. So the 20th century saw a big change in the scientific method to address the issues of what to do about the disciplines where human behavior and human thought were becoming more and more important. So Karl Popper was the researcher who understood the limitations of the original scientific method and knew that if it had to evolve, it needed some refinements. So his main idea was that the scientific method was not infallible, okay? And that in some disciplines, well-established scientific disciplines often came to incorrect conclusions, incorrect theories. On the other hand, psychology and other social sciences, they found the right answer even if they didn't use the correct method for scientific method perfectly. So he began to question the very definition of science itself and how to develop a scientific method or modify the scientific method to address some of these limitations in these areas. So he stated or questioned whether advances through a process where a theoretical scientist could develop a theory and an empirical scientist could try and test the theory, okay? And they must be properly tested to be scientific. So up until the time of Pavlov and Wundt, these were two researchers that really established psychology. Wundt had the first psychology lab in Leipzig, Germany, 1879. But their theories were difficult to test absent methodological ways to do this, okay? Further, Pavlov was a physician who was studying digestion, and Wundt was studying psychophysics, or perception. That's what we know today. So they needed a way to bridge from the more mathematical sciences to the human research using the scientific method or a modified scientific method to apply to what they were doing. So Thomas Kuhn was the first researcher to try and make this bridge of a modified or applied scientific method. And he is famous for introducing the idea of paradigms, okay? And a paradigm is a way to acquire a body of knowledge through experimenting with theories that sometimes conflicted with each other. And he thought that, testing these conflicting theories would find that one theory would become more dominant. And then that dominant theory would be presented to the scientific community for consensus, and this would be called a scientific paradigm, okay? He also said that scientists would hold on to a paradigm for as long as they could, as long as the evidence kept compiling to show that this paradigm was correct. However, if during the compilation of consensus-building experiments showed that there were some systematic conflicts within that paradigm, then that paradigm would be modified or even overthrown, and then we would have what he called a paradigm shift, or a new set of augmentations to original theory. And then this would continue. Paradigms would be built, more research would take place, they would be augmented or modified or shifted to accommodate the new empirical research. And that's what we have today, paradigm shifts, and that's how these fields advance, okay? So an example of a paradigm shift in psychology would be what we call the nature-nurture debate. Some philosophers, such as Kant, said that all behavior was known from birth, that we were born with everything that we need to know about the world. And that is called a nativist approach, okay? Other philosophers, such as John Locke, approached an empirical view that said that everything we know or come to be is as a result of what he called a tabula rasa, or a blank slate. And life writes its experiences upon the person And from that, that's how learning takes place. So you're born with no innate ability, okay? So he would be more of the nurture side of it. So what this came to be would be a nativist empiricist debate or paradigm, or the nature-nurture debate, same thing. So today, the current paradigm, through enormous amounts of research from a lot of diverse areas in psychology, neuropsych, behavioral psych, physiological psych, social psychology, cognitive psychology, today we know that it is an interaction paradigm, an interactionist paradigm, where there is some nature, we are born with some abilities, and there is some nurture which refine and hone those abilities. So that's an example of how paradigm shifts happen. So then we had Paul Feyerabend, referred to as the scientific anarchist. So Papa realized that science had split into a lot of different disciplines, and Feyerabend believed that these disciplines had become too complex to define by one overarching model. He believed that trying to force all scientific disciplines, especially disciplines that were quite different, like human behavior, cognition, those types of disciplines, from something like chemistry, was necessary, and that to have one set of rules actually hurt the progression of science, and it created barriers for different disciplines. So his strongest argument against the overall branch of a very rigid scientific method was that many major discoveries may not have been made at all, because if they followed the overall rigid scientific method, it would have limited their line of inquiry. And he cited Galileo and Copernicus as examples, because had they used those very rigid methods, they would never have come to the conclusions that they came to at the time, okay? And he said that, they broke some scientific rules, and that's what gave us some really good information. And he pointed out that scientific discovery progressed because it was uneven. And there were many different leaps and bounds that happened that actually ignored the scientific method. So he also looked at Copernicus, Darwin, Einstein, and said if they too had stuck with a very rigid scientific method, they never would have published their theories, and they would have become stuck in this endless loop of observation and experimentation. So they would have been resigned to making scientific leaps without ever gaining enough momentum or evidence to produce big sweeping changes. So today, after a long history of scientific method, the scientific method, passing from the Greeks to the Muslims to Renaissance, where are we left with today? Well, the original rigid scientific method works for some disciplines very well, and for others it needs to be modified and applied to the confines or to the examples and outlying types of methodological issues of a particular discipline, such as human-based behavioral, cognitive, neuro, psych, perception, sensation, those kinds of things, those types of issues. So they have to have some sort of modification or application, okay? That's the way they adapt and the way it's going to evolve. So the best way to look at the scientific method is through discipline. The scientific method, basic foundational principles of experimentation, observation, data collection, categorization, all of those things you can find in every single discipline. But some other disciplines have different applications and modifications that make that discipline unique and able to evolve, okay? So every scientific discipline has, we would call this methodological narcissism, the way that they do it. And it works, it's fine, it's still following the scientific method, but it's adapted and modified, okay? It's not rejecting the overall scientific method. So an example of that would be how physicists and chemists follow Popper, and social scientists, behavioral biologists are more in the Feyerabendian philosophy of things. So whatever methodological practice is accepted, the scientific method is still there in some form or another, okay? It's expanded now, it's evolved, and it's more of an umbrella for which many disciplines can coexist under it, okay? So research has a long and ancient history, as I have just very quickly gone through history and shown you all the twists and turns of research. I hope you enjoyed that and realize that some of the greatest minds of history and humanity have contributed throughout culture and time. And it's up to us now to add to that body of knowledge. And hopefully you'll be doing some of that this semester. I look forward to seeing the kind of research that you guys are excited about and how you're going to advance research as well. So good luck for this semester. I'm very excited that you're here and that you're on this journey. So good luck for the future.